The monitor screamed before I did. Trauma Bay 4, 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and the man seizing on my gurney had blue lips and a face I hadn't seen in 22 years. My hands didn't shake. They never do, not after 2 decades of pediatric codes. But something under my ribs went cold when the paramedic called out his name for the chart. Sheldon Voss. The same Sheldon Voss who stood in front of a medical school disciplinary board when I was 25 years old and swore, under oath, that I had stolen another student's research. The same man whose testimony ended my career before it started. The same man I watched from a folding chair while security walked me out of that lecture hall with a cardboard box of my belongings. 22 years. That's how long it took for the man who destroyed my future to end up on my table, needing my hands to keep him alive. I could have stepped back and let another attending take the case. Nobody would have blamed me. I didn't. Instead, I picked up the paddles and made a choice that would unravel a secret my hospital, my family, and Sheldon Voss himself had spent 2 decades burying. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I want to tell you something about the man on that table before I tell you what happened next. Sheldon Voss wasn't a stranger who wandered into my ER by accident. Bellwood Regional Medical Center sits 11 miles from the university where we were both third-year students, back when I still believed hard work was enough to protect you from other people's ambition. He knew exactly which hospital he was being brought to when his chest seized up in a parking garage downtown. Whether that was coincidence or something else is a question I didn't have time to ask that night, but I've had time since. Here's what I didn't know yet, standing over him with my hands doing what they've always done. I didn't know his daughter was already inside my building, in scrubs, 3 years into her residency, calling me Dr. Winters every single day, without either of us knowing what our names meant to each other's history. I didn't know he'd asked for me by name before he lost consciousness, and I didn't know that saving his life would force me to finally learn why he lied. 22 years ago, I was a third-year medical student at Halloway University, 4 months from graduation, and I had never wanted anything in my life the way I wanted to become a pediatrician. My mother had cleaned hospital floors for 30 years without ever once being allowed past the visitors line into the wards themselves. I used to tell her that one day I'd walk through those doors wearing a white coat instead of holding a mop, and she believed me before I believed myself. Sheldon Voss was in my cohort. We weren't close. He ran with a sharper, more political crowd, the kind of students who understood which professors to charm and which committees mattered. But we shared a research rotation under Dean Norbert Falk, studying pediatric cardiac anomalies. It was meticulous, unglamorous work, the kind that takes 18-hour days and produces exactly one publishable finding if you're lucky. I found that finding. I wrote it up myself, cross-checked it twice, and submitted it under my own name 3 weeks before graduation. 9 days later, I was called into Dean Falk's office and told that another student had come forward, claiming I'd copied his prior, unpublished data. I remember asking who. I remember the silence that followed. I remember being told that I would find out soon enough, in front of the full committee, and that until then, I was suspended from clinical rotations. That soon enough turned into a disciplinary hearing, with 6 people at a long table and one witness sitting across from me in a borrowed tie, Sheldon Voss, reading from a prepared statement that described, in specific and damning detail, data he claimed had been his own, data he said I'd accessed through a shared lab drive weeks before my discovery. He never looked at me once while he spoke. I remember that more than anything. Not his voice, not his words, just the top of his bowed head while he read a lie that ended my career before it began. I was expelled 11 days before I would have graduated. No appeal process existed at Halloway back then for a student without money or a family name on a donor plaque. I finished my degree 4 years later at a state school 200 miles away, older than my classmates, working nights to pay for a mistake that was never mine. I became a pediatrician anyway, because I refused to let one man's lie decide who I got to be. But I never stopped wondering, in the quiet hours of long shifts, what Sheldon Voss had actually been protecting when he stood up and destroyed me instead. I built a life on the other side of that wound. I married my husband here in Louisville 19 years ago, back when he was finishing his own residency, and I was just grateful someone believed the version of me that existed before the hearing. We had our daughter first. She's 15 now, sharp-tongued, and watchful in a way that reminds me of myself at that age, before anyone had ever lied about me in a room full of people who mattered. Our son came later. At 8 years old, he still climbs into our bed during thunderstorms, still believes his mother can fix anything, and some nights, I let him believe that a little longer than I probably should. My mother-in-law has never fully forgiven me for the 4 missing years on my resume, the gap she's brought up at every holiday dinner for 19 years, as though it were evidence of some character flaw, rather than the aftermath of an injustice. My father-in-law, by contrast, is the only person in that family who ever asked me the real story and believed every word of it without needing proof. He's the reason I still trust that some people choose the truth, even when a lie would be easier. I built my entire adult career at Bellwood Regional, rising from resident to attending to, 3 years ago, unofficial mentor to half the young doctors in this building, including, though I didn't know it yet, a quiet, precise third-year resident named Celine Ratliff, who reminded me so much of myself at that age that I'd started, without quite admitting it, treating her like the daughter of my own ambition. I hadn't spoken Sheldon Voss's name out loud in over a decade. I certainly never expected to hear it called across a trauma bay by a paramedic reading vitals off a chart attached to a dying man's chest. The paramedic said he'd collapsed in a parking garage outside a downtown medical conference, clutching his chest, and that a bystander had started compressions before the ambulance arrived. By the time he hit my trauma bay, his rhythm was already unstable, his oxygen dropping, his lips turning the particular shade of blue-gray that tells you a heart is failing faster than a body can compensate for it. I didn't recognize him right away. 22 years changes a face. The sharp, confident jaw I remembered from that hearing room had softened, the dark hair gone entirely silver, deep lines carved around eyes that were, in that moment, rolled back and unseeing. It was the name on the chart that did it. Sheldon Voss. I said it out loud without meaning to, and my charge nurse, Bertram Odom, glanced up at my face and clearly read something there he'd never seen from me before in 6 years of working codes together. "Dr. Winters," he said, "you good?" I was already moving. Whatever I was or wasn't feeling, there was a human being in cardiac arrest in front of me, and the training that had carried me through 20 years of emergencies didn't care about my history. I called the code. I intubated. I watched the monitor flatline once, twice, and I put my hands where they needed to go and did the work my body has done 1,000 times, while some smaller, older part of me stood outside myself, watching Sheldon Voss's chest rise and fall under my palms, and thinking, of all the men who could have ended up on this table. We got a rhythm back on the third round of compressions. Weak, thready, but present. I called for cardiology, ordered the labs, and it was only once he was stabilized enough to be wheeled toward the cath lab that Dr. Holt Pretty, our chief of staff, appeared in the doorway of the trauma bay with an expression I'd learned, over the years, to recognize as trouble wearing a calm face. "A word, Dr. Winters?" he said. I followed him into the corridor, my scrubs still damp with the effort of the last 11 minutes, and he told me, carefully, the way hospital administrators tell you things that are actually instructions dressed up as concern, that the patient's family had requested information about any history between Dr. Winters and Mr. Voss, and that given the sensitivity, perhaps I should consider stepping back from his continuing care. Sensitivity to what exactly? I asked. Pretty's answer told me everything I needed to know, without telling me anything at all. His daughter mentioned you two may have crossed paths professionally, years ago. I just want to be sure there's no conflict of interest that could complicate things, for the hospital, or for you. I understood, in that moment, two things at once. The first was that somewhere in this building, a young woman I had mentored for 3 years was standing beside her father's gurney, learning for the first time that her mentor and her father shared a history neither of them had ever spoken about. The second was that Sheldon Voss, even unconscious, had somehow found a way to make his crisis about protecting his own reputation before it was about surviving it. There's no conflict, I told Pretty. I'm his attending of record. I'm not going anywhere. I meant it as a statement about my professional integrity. I would understand only later how much more it actually meant. I went back to work the second Pretty walked away, because that's the only thing I've ever known how to do with a feeling too large to look at directly. I checked labs. I reviewed the intubation numbers. I told myself, the way I've told myself 100 times over the years, about 100 smaller griefs, that the work would hold me together until I had time to fall apart properly, in private, later. It didn't stop me from noticing the way the ER staff had gone quiet around me, the particular careful politeness people extend to a colleague they suspect is standing on the edge of something they don't understand. Bertram caught up with me by the supply closet and, in the blunt, unshowy way he's always had, asked if I wanted him to reassign the case to another attending. No questions, no explanation needed to anyone. I appreciate that, I told him, but I'm not walking away from a patient because his name makes my chest hurt. Didn't say you had to walk away, he said. Said you didn't have to explain yourself if you did. I thought about that offer, more than I let on. 22 years of training had taught me exactly how to compartmentalize a feeling long enough to finish a shift, but nothing had prepared me for the specific vertigo of standing over the man who ended my first career, using every skill that same injustice had forced me to build twice, in a second life I'd assembled almost entirely out of spite and stubbornness. He was stabilized in the cath lab within the hour. A partial blockage, survivable, the kind of cardiac event that leaves a person shaken, but functional if they follow instructions and get lucky. I checked on him myself once he was moved to the cardiac ICU, some old habit of thoroughness that had nothing to do with him personally and everything to do with the way I've always finished what I start. He was awake when I walked in, groggy, tethered to monitors, but awake. And the moment his eyes found my face above the surgical mask I hadn't yet removed, something in his expression cracked open in a way I hadn't expected and wasn't prepared for. "Renee," he said, and his voice broke on the 2 syllables of my name in a way that made the hair on my arms rise. "You came." "I'm your attending, Mr. Voss. It's my job." His hand found my wrist before I could step back. Weak, trembling, but insistent, the grip of a man who has decided something matters more than his own exhaustion. "There are things I need you to know," he whispered, "before anyone else tells you a version that isn't true. Please, I don't have as much time as I thought I did. Quick thing before I keep going, if you're new here, hit subscribe now, because you're about to want to know how this ends." I pulled my hand free, more sharply than I meant to, and told him to rest. But I stood in that doorway a long moment afterward, staring at a monitor, tracking the rhythm of a heart that had once, deliberately, helped stop mine. And I understood that whatever he was about to tell me was going to reopen a wound I had spent 2 decades convincing myself was closed for good. I didn't go back to see him again that night. I told myself it was because my shift had ended, because I had 2 children waiting for me at home who didn't know or care about a ghost from my past. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid of what he wanted to tell me, and more afraid of how badly, after 22 years, some small, unhealed part of me still wanted to hear it. I told my husband everything over a late dinner after the kids were asleep. Nathaniel had been in my life for the last 19 of those 22 years, and he was one of only 3 people alive who knew the whole story of what had happened at Holloway. That I hadn't left medical school for personal reasons, as I'd let his family believe for years, but had been forced out by a lie I never got the chance to properly fight. He set his fork down halfway through the meal, and I watched something protective and furious move behind his eyes. "You don't owe him anything," he said. "Not your time, not your forgiveness, not one more minute of your attention." "I know," I told him, and I meant it, but I also knew, even then, that I was going to walk back into that ICU room the next morning, because some questions don't stay buried just because you've decided to stop asking them. What I hadn't planned for was Celine. She found me in the staff lounge before my shift the next day, still in yesterday's expression of quiet shock, holding a coffee she clearly wasn't drinking. "Dr. Winters," she said, "can I talk to you about my father? I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because this channel has always been about honesty over comfort." I felt a flash of something close to betrayal, not because Celine had done anything wrong, but because for 3 years I had watched this young woman's diagnostic instincts, mentored her through her hardest rotations, told her more than once that she reminded me of the doctor I'd wanted to become before anyone tried to stop me, and the entire time, she had been the daughter of the man responsible for that stopping. "I didn't know," she said, before I could respond, reading something in my face. "I swear to you, Dr. Winters, I had no idea there was any history between you and my father until Dr. Pretty asked me about it yesterday. He's never talked about Holloway, not once. Not the disciplinary case, not you, not any of it." I believed her. There was no reason not to. The shock in her face was too specific, too raw to be performance. But her next sentence was the one that stayed with me for the rest of that day. "He asked for you by name before he went under," she said. "Not a cardiologist, not the on-call attending. You, by name. And he told the paramedics to bring him to Bellwood specifically, even though University Medical was 4 minutes closer to where he collapsed." That detail sat wrong with me all morning, the way a piece of a diagnosis sits wrong when the symptoms almost fit a pattern but not quite. Sheldon Voss hadn't ended up in my ER by chance. He had chosen it, chosen me, deliberately, and I couldn't yet tell whether that choice came from guilt or from calculation. My first theory, and I'll admit it plainly because red herrings are part of how truth eventually surfaces, was that Voss was protecting himself in some new way. I learned, through a conversation with Bertram, that Voss had, in recent years, become a significant donor to a hospital ethics foundation, funding scholarships in underprivileged medical students' names, the kind of philanthropic reputation building that looks generous on paper and conveniently erases an old scandal underneath it. I wondered, uncharitably, whether his sudden need to tell me the truth was less about honesty and more about controlling the narrative before some old skeleton found its way back into daylight on its own. I was wrong about that, but it would take a phone call to a woman I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years to find out how wrong. Marion Voigt had been a junior professor at Halloway during my 3rd year. Quiet, meticulous, one of the only faculty members who had ever treated me like a scientist rather than a charity case, admitted on a diversity scholarship, as some of my classmates liked to whisper in the hallways. She'd left academic medicine years before I did, retired now to a small house outside Lexington, and when I called her out of nowhere and said Sheldon Voss's name, there was a long silence on the line before she spoke. "I wondered when this would finally come back around," she said. She told me she'd kept records, actual paper records, because she'd never fully trusted the department's digital archive even then. From the year of my disciplinary hearing, she told me she'd always doubted the official story, though she'd never had proof strong enough to act on, and that she'd held on to her doubts and her old files for over 2 decades because some quiet, stubborn part of her had never believed I'd done what they said I did. "Come see me," she said. "Bring your patients. This is going to take longer than a phone call." In those same 2 days, word of what had happened moved quietly through the hospital, the way these things always do, hallway by hallway, without a single person actually meaning any harm by it. A colleague I'd worked beside for a decade asked, with careful casualness, whether it was true I'd once been involved in some kind of academic dispute back in my training years. I told her only that it was a long story, and something in my face must have made clear it wasn't one I was ready to tell in a break room between patients, because she didn't ask again. Dr. Pretty requested a private meeting the following afternoon, ostensibly to check in, though we both understood it was really about risk exposure, whether a reopened decades-old grievance involving a major hospital donor could become a liability for Bellwood if it became public in the wrong way. I told him the truth, that I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do with what I'd learned, and that until I did, there was nothing for the hospital to manage. My own children noticed something was different, the way children always do, even when you think you've hidden it well. Nora, 15, and sharper than I was ever given credit for at her age, asked me over dinner why I kept checking my phone and then setting it face down without answering it. I told her it was a complicated situation with a patient, which was true without being the whole truth, and she studied me the way she does when she knows there's more and has decided, for now, to let me keep it. Elijah, at 8, only wanted to know if the sick man on the news, a local paper, had run a small item about Voss's hospitalization, mentioning his foundation, was one of my patients, and whether I'd made him better. I'm working on it, I told my son, and meant it in more ways than he could have understood. I sat with Marion's invitation for 2 full days, torn between the instinct to protect myself from reopening a wound I'd built an entire life around closing, and the growing, undeniable pull of finally understanding why. In the end, it wasn't curiosity that decided it for me. It was Celine, showing up at my office door on the 3rd day with red-rimmed eyes, telling me her father had asked to speak to both of us together in the same room before his discharge. He says he owes us both the truth, she said, the real version, not the one from the hearing. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I realized, watching her, that whatever he was about to tell us, she was walking into it just as unprepared as I was. If this story has you as hooked as I was standing in that doorway, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think Sheldon Voss was really protecting all those years ago, because I promise you, the answer surprised even me. I drove to Lexington that weekend. Marion Voigt met me at her kitchen table with a small cardboard box of yellowed folders, and what she showed me over the next 3 hours rewrote everything I thought I understood about the worst day of my professional life. The folder Marion slid across her kitchen table held photocopies of lab logs from our shared research rotation, dated weeks before my disciplinary hearing, logs that, according to the department's own sign-in sheets, showed Sheldon Voss had never once accessed the drive containing the pediatric cardiac data he'd sworn under oath was his. He hadn't been in the lab enough hours that semester to have generated the findings he claimed. Marion had noticed the discrepancy back then, quietly, and had been overruled by Dean Falk when she raised it, told the matter was settled, and that raising further doubt would only prolong an already painful process for everyone involved. "Everyone except you," she said, watching my face as I read. But the sign-in logs weren't the part that stopped my breath. Tucked beneath them was a single handwritten letter, undated, in Sheldon Voss's own hand, addressed to Dean Falk, never sent apparently, but somehow kept in Marion's files after Falk's own office was cleared out following his retirement. In it, Voss confessed, in his own words, that the actual data thief hadn't been me at all. It had been his fiancée at the time, a fellow student named Odessa Fife, who had falsified findings in an entirely separate case involving a pediatric patient's chart, an error that, if discovered, would have ended her career and possibly triggered a malpractice investigation into a death that had already occurred. Voss had panicked. Rather than let Odessa's falsification come to light, he had redirected the department's suspicion toward my legitimate, unrelated research, close enough in subject matter to be confused for the real controversy, obscure enough that no one thought to look past the story he handed them. I sat with that letter for a long time before I could speak. 22 years of believing I'd been destroyed over academic jealousy, over a stolen scholarship, or a wounded ego, and the truth was smaller and colder than that. I hadn't even been the actual target. I had been convenient, a name close enough to the real scandal to absorb it, sacrificed so a woman I'd never even properly known could keep a fatal mistake buried, and so the man who loved her could keep his own hands clean of having reported her. I confronted him 3 days later, in a private consultation room at Bellwood, with Celine sitting silently beside her father's bed, learning the truth about her own family in real time alongside me. Odessa passed away 11 years ago, Voss said, his voice thinner than I remembered from the hearing, stripped now of the confidence that had once let him read a lie without flinching. Ovarian cancer. I told myself for a decade that the truth could stay buried with her, that protecting her memory was the last thing I owed her. But I had a heart attack in a parking garage, Renee, and the only thought I had before everything went black was that I was going to die a coward twice. Once when I let you take the fall, and once more if I never told you why. I asked him the question that had followed me around for 2 decades, without my ever having the chance to put it to the person who could actually answer it. Why didn't you just tell the truth and let Odessa answer for her own mistake? She was alive. She could have defended herself, explained herself, taken whatever consequence came. Instead, you let a stranger take it for both of you. His answer, when it came, was quieter than I expected, stripped of any attempt to make himself sound better than what he'd done. Because I loved her more than I respected the truth, he said. And because you were the easiest person in that room to sacrifice. You didn't have a family name on a donor plaque. You didn't have a father on the board. I told myself that made it survivable for you, in a way it wouldn't have been for her, that you were resilient enough to rebuild, and she wasn't. I was wrong about almost everything else, but I wasn't wrong about your resilience. You built an entire second career out of the wreckage I left you. I've watched from a distance for years, Renee, prouder of you than I had any right to be, and ashamed every single time. You watched me, I repeated, something cold moving through my chest that had nothing to do with the cardiac monitors around us. From conference programs, hospital newsletters, my daughter's rotation schedule, once she started here, and I realized whose service she'd been assigned to. I told myself it was a sign I should finally say something. I told myself that for 3 years, Renee, and I still needed a heart attack to actually do it. You let me believe for 22 years that I stole someone's work, I said. You watched me get expelled 11 days before graduation, and you never once looked up from your statement. If you're watching this, and you've ever had to sit across from someone who owed you an explanation for years, turn on notifications for this channel. You won't want to miss where her story goes from here. I know, he said. I've spent every year since telling myself I'd find the right moment to fix it. There was never a right moment. There was only ever the moment I finally ran out of time to keep avoiding it. Celine hadn't said a word through any of this. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to her father. It was to me. I need you to know, I would have wanted to know Dr. Winters as my mentor either way, she said, her voice unsteady. None of what he did changes what you taught me, but I don't know how to feel about him right now, and I don't think that's something you can fix for me. I told her she didn't owe anyone a resolved feeling on a schedule. Some truths take longer to sit right than a single conversation allows, and I would know. I had spent 22 years arriving at mine, one long shift at a time, and I wasn't about to ask a 26-year-old to do it faster than I had. I could have destroyed Sheldon Voss, Marion Voigt's files, combined with his own unsent letter, were more than enough to reopen my case formally, clear my record with the state medical board, and expose him publicly in the process. Donor reputation, ethics foundation, and all. Some nights, in the years I'd spent quietly wondering why he'd done what he did, I had imagined exactly that kind of reckoning and told myself it would feel like justice. When the moment actually arrived, it felt like something far more complicated. I met with Marion again the following week, this time with an attorney present, and we filed a formal petition with the state board to correct my academic and licensing record, a private administrative process, not a public scandal, restoring my name in the places it had actually been damaged without detonating Sheldon Voss's current life, or, more importantly, his daughter's. Celine had done nothing to earn the collapse of her own reputation by association, and I found, when it came down to it, that I had no interest in making a 26-year-old resident pay a second time for a decision her father made before she was even born. Voss didn't fight the petition. He submitted a signed statement corroborating everything in his old letter, effectively ending his own donor-funded ethics foundation's credibility the moment the correction became part of the public board record, a consequence he absorbed without complaint, the first genuinely costly thing I'd ever watched him do. My father-in-law, when I finally told him the whole story over coffee one Sunday, said something I've turned over in my mind ever since, that the difference between a man who's sorry and a man who's merely caught is whether he pays a price he didn't have to pay. By that measure, Voss had finally, decades too late, become the first kind. My mother-in-law's reaction was different, and in its own way, more revealing, when she heard the full story, the version she'd waited 19 years to hear, the real reason for my missing years. She didn't apologize for a decade of pointed comments at holiday dinners. She simply went quiet, refilled her coffee, and never brought up the gap in my resume again. I've learned not to expect every wrong to be met with an apology. Sometimes silence is the only acknowledgement you're going to get, and I've had to decide, more than once in my life, whether that's enough for me to keep the peace I've built. Most days, it is. Celine stayed on at Bellwood. Our mentorship survived, what I genuinely wasn't sure it would. Not unchanged, but not broken either. There was an awkward stretch of a few weeks where she kept a careful, polite distance in rounds, clearly unsure whether I still wanted her in my service at all, and I finally sat her down myself and told her plainly that nothing about her father's choices had changed a single thing I believed about her potential as a physician. She cried in my office that day, briefly, the way people do when a fear they've been carrying quietly finally gets to put itself down. She told me, months later, that she'd started keeping her own meticulous records of every case she touched, a habit she said she'd learned from watching what happens to people when the truth depends entirely on someone else's memory. I recognized a piece of myself in that decision, and it made me proud of her in a way that had nothing to do with her father at all. She also told me, quietly, near the end of that same conversation, that she'd finally asked her father directly why he'd never once mentioned Holloway or the disciplinary hearing in 26 years of raising her. His answer had been simple, and it was the one detail from this entire ordeal that I found myself, unexpectedly, believing without reservation. He said he'd never told her because he'd never found a way to tell the story without admitting out loud what kind of man he'd chosen to be at 26 years old. and he hadn't been ready to watch his own daughter's face change when she heard it. She said she understood that answer and hated it in equal measure, and I told her that sounded like exactly the right way to feel about it. There was one more piece of this I hadn't expected, and it came from Norbert Falk's side of the story, rather than Voss's. Marion told me, during a follow-up call after the petition was filed, that she'd always suspected the dean himself had known more than he admitted at the time, that a man as meticulous as Falk had been about department politics would never have accepted Voss's account without at least privately weighing its holes. She had no proof strong enough to include in the petition, only the decades-old memory of a hallway conversation in which Falk had told her, cryptically, that some outcomes protect more people than the ones sitting in the room. I've turned that phrase over many times since. I don't know if it means Falk understood exactly what he was covering for, or simply that institutions, when protecting themselves, will always find it easier to sacrifice the person with the least power to fight back. Both possibilities sit uneasily with me, and I suspect they always will. Sheldon Voss recovered, physically. He sent me one final letter, this one addressed properly, sealed, delivered, thanking me for treating him the night his heart stopped, and apologizing, in plain, unguarded language, for 22 years he could never fully repay. I haven't decided yet whether I'll answer it. Some debts, I've learned, aren't actually meant to be settled between the two people who created them. Sometimes, the settling happens quietly, over years rather than moments, in how you choose to treat the next person who reminds you of your younger self, and let her become who she's meant to be without a single lie standing in her way. I've told you a lot of hard stories on this channel, about my husband, about my in-laws, about the patients who've broken my heart, and the ones who've mended it back together. But this one sat differently with me than most, because it wasn't really about a stranger's cruelty. It was about a man I once thought had no conscience at all, discovering, 22 years and one heart attack too late, that he'd had one the entire time. He'd just spent 2 decades choosing not to listen to it. I still don't know exactly how I feel about Sheldon Voss. Some days, I think what he finally did, the confession, the correction, the price he paid without a fight, was enough. Other days, I think no apology delivered this late ever really is, and that the 11 days I lost before my own graduation can't be handed back to me, no matter how many letters he writes. I'd genuinely love to know where you land on that, because I don't think there's one right answer, and this community has never been afraid to disagree with me when it matters. So tell me, in the comments, right now, do you think Sheldon Voss deserved the quiet correction I gave him? Or should I have let the whole truth become as public as the lie he told about me all those years ago? I read every single one of your comments, and on a story like this one, I need to hear what you'd have done in my position. If this episode moved you even a little, hit that like button so more people who need this kind of story find their way to it. Share it with someone in your life who's ever had to decide whether forgiveness is something you owe another person or something you give yourself. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because my story is far from finished. There are still chapters of my life with my husband, my children, and this hospital that I haven't told you yet, and I promise you, some of them are even harder to believe than this one. Before you go, do one more thing for me. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means more to me than you probably know that people so far from Louisville, Kentucky, care enough about my story to sit with it until the very end. I'll see you in the next chapter.